Cappy Wells' bust of Eiseley. UNL President Ronald Roskins gave the introduction, and Governor Kay Orr delivered the proclamations. The greetings and announcements followed from Nebraska Land Foundation President Bill Ramsey, Nebraska Academy of Science Executive Director C. Bertrand Schultz, the Friends of Loren Eiseley founder Ruth Thone, Friends President Cheryl Daniels, the Hall of Fame Commission Chair Pamela Fuchs, Secretary Jim Hansen handled the induction, and UNL Professor of Music Donna Harler and Director of the Opera Theater Chip Smith provided beautiful music on the occasion. But the heart of the program were those parts that dwell upon Eiseley and his wife Mabel and the unveiling of the bust that will repose in the Hall of Fame. These are scenes I like to play back in the video cassette of my mind. UNL Professor Emerita and nature writer Naomi Brill gave a brief biography of Eiseley, just touching on his many achievements. That so much more could be said about him suggests why the rather shy scholar would find withdrawal more comfortable. Perhaps the most moving account of the day was Marion Schultz's eloquent tribute to Mabel Langdon Eiseley. A gifted musical artist, Mabel found fulfillment for her talent even as she supported her husband in his. As I listened to Mabel, I could not help but remember Dorothy Thomas Bickrude's poetic description of the Eiseley's courtship and marriage. Equally pleasing was the University of Pennsylvania professor Ward Goodenough and former Nebraskan Frank Craybill's reminiscences of Eiseley, and Phil Heckman gave a marvelous dramatic reading of an Eiseley poem. That was a wonderful day. The next project that I want to talk about is the naming of the library. We have an Eiseley Library up on North 14th Street. It's one of the city's public libraries. This was the culmination of a dream of Carol Connor's, where she wanted to see quadrant libraries put in the city. And so we have basically in the northeast, and the southeast, the southwest, and the northwest, we have a library. And at that time, we were building the second two libraries. The other one was named for Bess Walt. This was a major effort due to the competition that we were facing. We presented our case to the board. Barb Summer did that. We wanted to be sure that we got the north location because that had an association with Eiseley, because Bill Gaffney and Eiseley would walk up North 14th Street and they'd go up to sit on a hill that was on the Bert Schultz property, and they'd discuss poetry and philosophy and whatever it is they wanted to talk about. There was a farmhouse right on Superior Street that on the Superior 14th Street corner, which is where they stopped for water when they walk up there, and we wanted our library to be right there. There's a Walgreens store there now, but we're real close to that corner, and that area is closely associated with Eiseley, therefore. So in the end, I won't give you all of the bloody detail, but in the end, our competition became with a woman who had been a very popular librarian up in that part of the town where there was a library that isn't there now. And she had a tremendous following. The compromise that was developed was that we would name the building for Eiseley and the children's library for the lady, and so that's how it all came out. We had a very nice ceremony out there. Statements were made by John Dale, who was the number 2 person in our library system at that time, and Christy Rothermund, who was our president, our Eiseley president at that time. The thing that is a little sad about the Eiseley Library is that when we conceived of all of this, there was going to be a park to the west of it, which would have a walkabout, which would have Eiseley quotations and all of that sort of thing. And we really were into this thing with the city, and everybody was enthused about it. But in the last analysis, the money just wasn't there, and we didn't get to have it. There is one other little thing that happened. We have the Beetle Center on our campus, which is a thing that is a science building for biosciences. It's a bioscience research center. And Bob Carey called us to ask if that thing, Bob Carey is the one who got the money out of the Senate, out of the Congress to finance the building of the Beetle Center. And he called us and asked if that should be named for Eiseley. Sadly, we couldn't say yes because it was the wrong branch of science, and it would have been incredibly inappropriate to have had Eiseley's name on something that really didn't represent him. But it was an interesting experience. Walter Beetle was the Nebraskan who was our only Nobel laureate at that time. And he was president of the University of Chicago at one point in time. Then, of course, a major event in our life was the writing of the Christensen biography, A Fox at the Wood's Edge. We really didn't have any involvement with that other than the fact that it was just going on in our midst, and it was the most exciting thing to have happening. And of course, to have Gale here and to be with him so much was wonderful too. And he did do interviews with a lot of local people, but he did a very thorough job of producing that book. And the book is a triumph, I think. But the interesting thing from my standpoint is what happened after the book came out. Gale and I got to be really good friends. Gale grew up in a little town in Iowa, which was just across the county line from where I grew up. And we knew all of the same people, even though we didn't know each other at that time. And we used to talk a lot about that. And we talked about a lot of things. But in the process of being with Gale, I started pushing for the idea that he developed this massive collection of archival material, and what was he going to do with it? He was at that time writing his biography on Hubble, and he was compounding his problem because he was developing a big archive on Hubble. Well, Gale was not too keen on the idea, but I tried to get him to think about giving it to the Heritage Room. And so I talked to him about that over several years. His archive that we do have here is an incredible thing because the state of the archives at Penn is just terrible. In the first place, so much of the material is on those, do you remember the old yellow sheets of paper that we used to use for carbon copies? And that's pulpy stuff, and it just falls apart. And so much of the material in the archives at Penn is that kind of thing that just is not surviving the vigors of time. I have a little friend, Pat Lyon, which I'll talk about later. She'd done work in the archives in Pennsylvania, and she said that she had to spend most of the time she was there just arranging things because it was so chaotic. So what we have here are Xerox copies, sound Xerox copies of the best things that are in the Penn archives. And so our archives are, because of the fact that our material is well cataloged, is really precious. The other thing that is in that collection is the fact that when Gale did his interviews with people, he always did them on tape. And so we've got all those tapes. Now the thing about those tapes is that they're with critical people, but those critical people started dying and falling away from us as soon as Gale got his book out. And so those tapes are incredibly impressive now because they represent the voices of people who are no longer with us. Gale came back. Gale was real interested in, when he was doing his research on Eiseley, he just was fascinated with the story of the jailbreak that happened down out of our penitentiary. And he came back and he wrote a book which is called The Posse. And so he was around here quite a bit. And it was during that time that I really put the pressure on him to give us that stuff. And he wasn't ready to do that. But it wasn't too much longer after he left that he decided that this is what he really ought to do. And so we got into negotiations with Carol Connor because there were certain things that he wanted. He needed to have some money, and he wanted rights of access to his materials and a whole bunch of things like that. And so we drew up a little contract, and we got the Christensen Archive. Other important related archives that we have here are Wilbur Gaffney's, Rudy Umland's, and Dorothy Thomas's. And Gaffney's wife, Elizabeth, is the one who gave us the painting that you'll see on the wall over there that was done by Daisy, because Elizabeth had that. Another archival topic that I want to talk about is when I was the NLHA president, I took on several issues, and one of them was the humidity in this room, but the one that really bugged me was the fact that we had in this little office over here a stack of tin cans that held 16 millimeter film, and that pile of tins was waist high, and it was a real pain in our little office over here. Well, that was the NBC series which started in showing in 1966, which was called Animal Secrets. This was a deal where Loren Eiseley read a script that he didn't write, and so he didn't do a very good job on the film because it wasn't him. It was the way it was. But the film that we had here was utterly useless because it was so brittle and fragile that we just never could have put it in a projector. And so I just wanted to get that stuff out of the office because it was just in the way, and if the girls kicked the cans over, they'd just be all over the floor. My idea was to give the material to the Historical Society. Larry Summers was the director of the Historical Society, and I knew that the Historical Society could treat that film and put it on VCR tape for us. And so I proposed that, and Carol Connor, of course, was our director. And Carol had a real problem because those tapes were city property. They belonged to the Heritage Room. And the problem of disposing of city property was a very almost impossible kind of thing to do. I won't take you through all of the stuff that we went through to get it, but we did get it done. We figured out how to do it. And those films are now available to view in the Heritage Room. The Heritage Room got VCR tapes of them, and they were ultimately converted to the regular, the modern CD format. And then there's the Bone Hunter film. That was done by Christine Lesiak for the Nebraska Public Television. Again, that was something that happened that we knew was going on, and it was very much in our environment, but we didn't have an awful lot to do with it. But our Naomi was serving as a consultant for the filming, and so she had copies of the script, and she let me read the script, and so we could discuss things, and Naomi smoothed out a lot of rough spots and stuff like that. Naomi was really good at this. The important part of what we did was we had discussions about how to protect the descriptions of Daisy, because we didn't want any reference in the film that she was crazy, because she wasn't crazy. She had a lot of problems, and she had some emotional issues, but she wasn't crazy. And so we smoothed that out. Another thing about the film is that my books are showing in the film, and what is really special is the early copies of the Prairie Schooner. I had gone to a sale. I was a great book hunter, you see, and I had gone to a sale where they had all of the early copies of the Prairie Schooner, including Volume 1, Number 1. Volume 1, Number 1, Lowry Wimberly wasn't able to print very many of them, and when the youngsters who were promised a school magazine discovered that it was a literary thing. They trashed most of them